Good morning, everybody, and welcome to March's meeting of the Environment, Housing and Community Scrutiny Board. My name is Councillor Stuart Galton. I'm chairing the meeting today, and I will now introduce the rest of the board.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Councillor Abdul Hanan for Headingley High Park.
Good morning, Councillor Kate Haig, representing Farnley and Wortley Ward.
Good morning, folks. Councillor Adrian McCluskey, Farnley and Wortley Ward.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Karen Renshaw, representing Asley and Robin Hood Ward.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Councillor Andy Rowntree. I represent Kirkstall on the council.
Good morning, Councillor Eleanor Thompson, Guiseley and Rawdon Ward.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Shapley from Beeston and Holbeck Ward.
Morning all, Councillor Lou Cunningham, Armley Ward.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Caroline Anderson. I represent Adwin Wharfdale Ward. I'm substituting for Councillor Barry Anderson today.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Norma Harrington, Councillor for Wetherby Ward.
Good morning, Becky Atherton, Scrutiny Advisor to the board.
Thank you for that, members, and welcome to you all, especially for those who are substituting today. We have Caroline Anderson subbing for Councillor Barry Anderson, and also we have Councillor Rowntree substituting for Councillor Dowson. You're very welcome, and we look forward to your avid contribution. Right, we also have particular welcome today for Temitope Ademasu, who is the new director that covers this scrutiny board. You're very welcome. We shall now go into the formal items so that we can start our business. So, Becky, item number 1.
There are no appeals today, Chair.
Item number 2.
No items excluded from the public domain.
Item number 3.
No late items, Chair.
Item number 4, any declarations of interest? I'll take that as a no. Item 5, apologies.
As noted, Chair, we've got 2 apologies from board members today. Councillor Jane Dowson, Councillor Rowntree is substituting, and Councillor Barry Anderson, Councillor Caroline Anderson is substituting.
Thank you very much. We'll go on to item 6, which is the minutes. Just to report back to members, I can confirm that after our previous discussion around the formation of new neighbourhood health boards, we appreciated that the fact that they cover neighbourhoods means that there is a locality interest, but also that since they're health focused, there would be a health interest. So we've got confirmation that this will be hosted by the Health Scrutiny Board, Adults, Health and Active Lifestyles, but they're very open to our contribution going forward if we so wish to do. Right. Also, I think it's worth noting that the street charter, which we took as a scrutiny item this political year, is going to go to Executive Board, well informed by our deliberation in April for formal approval. So can I ask somebody to propose the minutes as a true record? Thank you, Councillor Cunningham. And a seconder? Councillor Hanan, thank you. And we'll now move into our business items for today. Work programme. It will be noted that the Scrutiny Board will potentially have different membership in the new political year after May, but it doesn't stop us as dedicated members of this board to make suggestions for our successors going forward in terms of items of interest that we might want to include in the work programme. There are some suggestions in the papers. Are there any others that members wish to identify now? I'll take that as a no. I will report back, though, to the board that I have had discussions with third sector representatives at Voluntary Action Leeds to report back after our previous discussion of the third sector, which is in the minutes, that we will be open to suggestions going forward for them to identify specific areas for us to look at in the work programme in the next political year. So we look forward to that. We now move on to our first substantive item, which is the Parks and Green Space update report. It's a very large document, very ambitious, and covers a significant time period. So we do appreciate the opportunity to get an update from those people in charge of delivering it, but also in terms of us being able to give feedback as stakeholders in communities where the activity takes place. With us today, we have Councillor Rafiq, who is the executive member. We also have, as was mentioned earlier, Dr. Tomitope Adamosu, and we have Polly Cook, who is the Chief Officer, and Emma Trickett, who is the Parks Technical Manager. Who would like to introduce the item first?
Polly.
Councillor Rafiq.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, this is a report highlighting the progress on the Parks and Green Spaces strategy. We're 3 years into it, and I'm pleased to report that over some of the main highlights, there's a lot more work in the report, but I don't want to spend my time telling the board. I'm sure everybody's read it, but a new play barn visitor attraction was opened at Home Farm and Temple Newsome. We've had 75% of our community parks reaching a quality park standard. As ever, since 2020, we've actually been busy planting trees, and we managed to plant trees across 50 sites across the city. 20 playgrounds have been refurbished and 28 tennis courts renovated. A range of externally funded movements across the city have also been done as well. We've also had a green park, green flag standard for our city parks as well. The list goes on. I think we've made a record number of investment, particularly in our play areas, and there's more to be done, Chair. I'll stop there, and I'm sure Polly and Emma will add, and we're happy to, as ever to take questions and comments and feedback from the board to make further progress in our work going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Rafiq. Polly, do you want to add?
Just to, I suppose, draw the board's attention to one thing. So every year we come with the annual report, so I won't add any more on that. The one thing I'll just highlight is the fact that the two appendices, which are different this year. So the draft 9,000 acre play document, it's quite a little bit strange in some ways. We brought that to scrutiny because it's intended to be an inward facing document. But the reason I thought it was important is that it's going to be sort of the basis of our training programme. And there is a page 25, is sort of our next steps and about how we want to kind of implement that and roll that out. So I thought it was important that, one, we're transparent about it, but two, also just to see if you think there's anything else we should be doing to kind of embed that better. So kind of really welcome comments on that. And then also the draft design principles is an outward facing document, so that's right that comes to scrutiny. That has already been looked at from a sort of children's perspective through the Play Sufficiency Board, and is the intention is that will sit within like as a cross-council document, sort of incorporated also within planning. So again, we really welcome sort of feedback and comments on that document, so as well as the sort of more general conversations that we have. Thank you.
Thanks, Polly. I appreciate that gesture, that common understanding of terminology and direction is essential to proper inclusion in terms of making sure that people can participate from communities to the service and vice versa. Councillor Haig, you indicated you'd like to ask a question.
Yes, it's around the 9,000 acres of play, and green spaces, something that we have a lot of, certainly in my ward, and I know across the city as well. What is going to be the outcome of this strategy? I can see here there's a piece of work involving children with doing some research and producing some evidence. So what are the timescales like for that? How's that going to work? What's going to be the outcome of that? And what are we going to do with that information? How are we going to I mean, obviously there will be expenditure involved in this. How are we finding the money to do whatever it is that we identify, and how do we prioritise it? I think those are the main questions. Certainly, you know, there's a virtue often in people having green space, which is an amenity in that it makes a place, you know, just a nicer place to feel to live. It doesn't have to have a function, but there's definitely also a very strong case, especially in places where there's no real access to outdoor play at the moment, to have something that's a bit more structured, but not completely, you know, it doesn't have to be a formal playground, but something that gives children and young people the ability to gather in a way that's productive and good and healthy. So yeah, well, that's my questions.
So I think the document tries to take us away from playgrounds and starts to talk about space as all space as being playful. And I suppose that's the underlying message, isn't it, that we have lots of different people involved in the design of space. And what we're trying to do is kind of embed that thinking about, actually, can you just make a slight tweak? Can you do something different to make that space more playful? So I think part of it is having that ethos that play is not about the playground, it's not about the mugger, it's about space generally. In terms of the sort of almost what will it do, what will it deliver, I think part of it is some of the data gathering. So things like having the place efficiency assessment will allow us to, in answer to your question about prioritisation, to identify actually where there are sort of gaps within areas of the city. It will allow us to have a more structured approach to that. We want to also look at, because funding is an issue, and we know that, you know, just keep adding more playgrounds is not sustainable with the way that local authority finances are looking, that would be better to maintain the ones we've got well, and then actually in other areas we maybe look more at, I'm going to use Councillor Galton's favourite expression, natural play, which can be delivered more cheaply. And, you know, one of the challenges I've had up to now is actually, what do we mean by natural play? And I think one of the things that we're going to look at doing is kind of almost producing some examples of that and how you could do that and what that would look like, and getting some case studies from other places and putting sort of almost a cost against it, if that's, you know, a mud kitchen or it's tyres or something. So it just gives that sort of permission to play. But there are other things. We get approaches by sometimes this sort of private sponsorship, for example, to actually place different play equipment in parks at no cost to the users, but there might be a different commercial arrangement, but actually people can use that equipment for free. So there's lots of different things I think we can explore to make our spaces more playful. And the idea of this is just to look at it differently. I think it's to challenge ourselves in terms of consultation as well. So Emma led on a really good consultation process around Lotherton, and we saw that actually if we did that differently, we could get really different outcomes in terms of how we engage and how we can make sure that what we deliver will meet the needs of the community. So I think it's trying to embed that as the norm, as opposed to it depends who's doing the piece of work in terms of what outcomes you're going to get. But that will take a little bit of time because it's a big service and lots of different people to sort of touch on play. But that's where we're trying to get to as a service, really. So I hope that answers.
Obviously, there's a number of interested parties, both within and outside the council, in green spaces and play. So obviously, we do need a really joined up approach. A lot of the land we're talking about isn't parks, it'll be housing or education. So we need to find a way to and their budgets for maintenance will be very different, and there'll be impacts across those areas, but also, especially with things like, I'm thinking of Pride in Place in my own ward, but across the city as well, ambitions within that that programme. I certainly, play is it's probably the top thing that comes up in our consultations around that. So that's a separate process that's happening at the moment, where people are going to have expectations and indeed the ability to invest in play, should that be what the community decide they want. So we need to be really joined up across all these areas. I don't necessarily see that in the documents in front of us. But also, when you're talking about green spaces that are close to where residents live, it has to be, it has to be something that the community also finds is an acceptable use of the space. So there's a bit of a tension there.
Thank you. That was a question. There was Councillor Haig, which aspect did you want a particular response for?
It was about how we join up with housing, with education, and with other programmes like Pride in Place, who all have an interest in this, and that might be an interest where they, they don't have the money, or they do have the money, or they're identifying priorities, or doing a piece of consultation which is separate from what you're proposing here, and with a different part of the community possibly.
I think, as whichever part of the council is sort of starting those conversations, I think the tendency, if it was to do with play, or if it was to do with sort of green spaces, be it housing or our own, they would come back via our service. So there would always be that natural link up. Obviously, things like Pride in Place, we've already made those connections via sort of Paul's team and the boards, and obviously, if that's the direction that those communities want to go in, we will play an active part in that. But I think because of the Place Sufficiency Board, which is like external and internal partners, there's a lot of that kind of connectivity is already in place. So I think working through those, and it's come from the kind of council's place efficiency strategy. We're looking at how we deliver our part of that and work within that framework. So I think it is already sort of joined up and connected, and obviously a lot of the services you just mentioned already sit within the same directorate, so we are working together on a regular basis.
Thank you. Councillor Ronfrey.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the report, Polly. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there. The first question is, why no mention of ash dieback and measures to deal with it? Because I would have thought that that's absorbing quite a lot of parks and green spaces time at the moment.
No conscious reason, in all honesty. I suppose we just try to pick out the sort of highlights. There's been quite a lot of work done and a lot of publicity about ash dieback. I think probably because when the original action plan was done, that kind of underpins this, ash dieback didn't feature on there. So it's something that's come along since, but happy to include that in next year's update. So there's no sinister reason to why it's not included.
Okay, thanks. I mean, I think it would be worth hearing about going forward, because it's a big deal, I'm sure, in terms of time and resources for yourself, and obviously the impact it's sort of having on people who notice it. I mean, you'll probably be aware from email that I've got particular ward interest in this. I don't want to go into that at the moment, but can you say a bit in general terms about the your overall approach to the science of this? Are we sort of acting sort of fully up to date with what we know? Is the cutting edge picture changing in terms of what was believed a few years ago about the probable loss of 95% of ash trees? Is that still the case? Are we up to date with that, and are we responding accordingly? And a bit about the strategy for dealing with this, where we go for felling and pruning, and what other options there are. Thank you.
So I'm not going to claim to be a technical specialist in this, so I will explain it as far as I know. The way that we're approaching it is we are only removing ash that are at the final stage, i.e. it is a dead tree, so that's not going to come back. We're not removing the ones where it's showing some signs of ash dieback. So there is the potential that they could make a recovery, and that I know that's what some people are worried about. It's the ones that are really, and I'm trying to remember if it's 1 to 4, if 4's the worst or if 1's the worst, but whichever way it is, it's the worst 2 categories we're focused on, and that's where there is a direct risk to life, and we're targeting the ones where they've got the potential to fall onto highway, and that's where the surveys have been done. So we did the sort of the ground truthing surveys, which are done kind of using technology, but then that has been followed up by on the ground actual inspections to make sure that what we're doing matches, and we are using a qualified arboriculturist as well. But what we are finding, which is when we do those surveys, we are finding trees beyond ash that are dead. And actually, today it's very pertinent because we are in a high wind situation. The forestry team are on high alert. Actually being able to proactively do that prevents where we see where trees are coming down on cars, blocking highways. So it is important that there is a proactive management strategy for that.
Right, thank you. So are we comfortable that any tree that is like sort of condemned to death, as it were, we're going to fill this, that that will have been individually surveyed by a specialist, and that it's not like you will just sort of look at a group of trees and think, no, that's got ash dieback, we better have these out as well.
Yeah, so every tree will have been individually looked at that gets taken down.
Okay, thank you. Final one, Chair, if I may.
Is it another one about ash dieback?
Not particularly, no. It is a right report. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I noticed the talking about volunteer groups coming into parks and doing sort of supervised activities with rangers in attendance and that, and mention of corporate groups. I do have a bit of experience of this myself from a previous work role. I'm wondering if the sort of the corporate side of this, if this is still being taken up at a high level. Are you able to fill the places that are offered?
We are still getting corporate volunteers, and when we don't get corporate volunteer groups, we backfill with community. So whichever, so we've had a slight shortage in the last year out of rangers, which we're looking to fill at the moment. But we use a session either with corporate or community volunteers, so we don't waste any of the sessions.
Okay, thank you. Do you make does the service make a charge to the organisations that send them off?
We've started this year for the first time, so we're just having a look and reviewing that to see how that's worked this year.
Right, okay. It will be interesting to see what impact that has. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And when does that review complete, Polly? Is it in the calendar year or a political year?
Probably within about the next 3 months. So.
Great. So we can have those figures come back before the next annual report. That's really useful, because we have asked that previously at Scrutiny Board, Councillor Rowntree. So it's of general interest, not just your own. Can I just ask about the tree element? As has just been pointed out, trees are a big part of a councillor's casework load, in terms of people fearing that the tree which is near their house is potentially dangerous. We've also got the added issue of ash dieback and having to respond to that as an organisation. And then on top of that, we have got a programme of planting trees. So that's an expanded, pressure on parks and countryside arboriculturally. So the question is, has our arboricultural team or forestry team expanded to match the issues which are facing it? And if it hasn't, do we have a long-term plan to get the capacity in place for when it's needed, going forward?
So in terms of the ash dieback, that has been funded separately. So that hasn't put an additional pressure on the team. So that isn't impacting on what we're doing with anything else. That's because of the health and safety risk. That was done as discretionary capital. So I put a bid into the central pot for the council. It was recognised as a massive health and safety risk. And so the staff that work on that are capitalised. They don't come out of the revenue budget. So in terms of our general forestry work, that hasn't had an issue.
And were they our forestry staff, or did you bring them in as private contractors?
Forestry staff. So, but well, no, actually, sorry. So the person who manages it is our forestry staff. The team that are doing the work, it's a private contractor. So that hasn't impacted. And we work in terms of our forestry work, we have a mixed economy. We don't do all of it in-house. We've always done. We have external contractors and our own in-house team, because it allows for the peaks and troughs, as you know, when we've got days like today, or we get sudden storms where it has an impact, then we can kind of contract out that work. So we balance between the two, and it allows us. It is as a service, it is our one area of big financial pressure. But we have overspent against our forestry budget, but we've accommodated that by making savings elsewhere. So we haven't not done it. We've recognised that that's really important. And I think as well, we're seeing with sort of the changing climate in terms of the heavy rains and then the wind, it's just a really bad combination. So trees are coming down that you wouldn't necessarily have expected to come down, you couldn't predict. In terms of that sort of forward plan, I think we're building that in. So that pressure that we're seeing, we're accepting that that's not just a one-off, but we are picking that up as a service. We're not asking the council to sort of boost our budget on that. We're just balancing other parts of the service in order to deliver that. And in terms of the woodland creation programme, I suppose where we have biggest risks is where trees are near. Is where trees are near to people's homes or where they're near to roads and things. And, you know, not all, but a lot of the woodland creation tends to be more in sort of the green spaces and things. So actually that makes it slightly easier to manage. So sometimes the costs of tree management are to do with the traffic management costs. So actually that, you know, some of that is balanced in terms of the way that we're actually doing that woodland creation as well.
Internal charges raise their head again. Yeah. Right. We're now going to go to Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got a set of hopefully very short questions, and I'll reverse them because the last one I wrote down was on trees, so it makes sense to start there if that's okay. So one particular challenge that we've noticed is where trees are lost due to disease. So we lost some beautiful cherry trees, much treasured by the community, to bleeding canker, I think it was. But then it was too late to plan for replanting for those trees in similar locations and all the usual issues of what services are underneath. So just if there's any way to make that a little bit more agile, especially where they are kind of specimen trees that have been around for decades, perhaps working with ward members on that would be really welcomed, because people are really sad when the blossom goes. Then back to play. Not surprising that I'll be talking about play. Just wondering what we can do to look at innovation in sort of low cost interventions to enable play. Something we saw on holiday in the summer was QR codes on pavements with some simple painting, and then that would link you to a YouTube video for games you could play hopping around on the fish near a lake, on paving, and even in a really tiny paved area off a square. But also, as Councillor Haig said, to how we work with other departments, especially housing, where they've got small patches of green space to enable play. So the nature play we were talking about, whether things like willow sculptures, things the community could get involved in. And then really a concern about the cost of, so we're working on a playground improvement at the moment, which we're really excited about, but trying to make that accessible makes it even more expensive. So a wheelchair accessible roundabout or a swing might be 2 or 3 times the price. And how do we work that in to make sure that the investment we make in play is as accessible as it can be, both for carers and for children and young people? Thank you. Sorry about the long list.
Okay. In terms of the trees, I can kind of maybe guess the situation and we can talk specifically about it. But I mean, ultimately, we have a timescale in terms of the programme for when we can sort of bid for the funding that we get from places like the White Rose Forest and things. So, and obviously the tree planting season is getting shorter and shorter. I think we have from about November to February now because of the climate limitations, and that's when we get the best survival rate. So it may be that it's happened too late in order to hit that, but it should then be able to be picked up the year after. We have had examples, and this is on Ash Dieback and it could be on yours, where when a tree comes out, we're not allowed to replant a tree because of services, which obviously is difficult, and it's difficult to explain that, isn't it? But we have to do the service checks to make sure what's there, and sometimes services have been put in after the last tree was planted, but the team will try and work to look for something in the locality or something different. So if you're having any issues with that, come to me with the specific examples and happy to look at it. In terms of innovation, you know, it's a good challenge. You know, really like the idea that you said, and we're open to looking at all different ideas. How we maybe it is a good idea in terms of via our social media and things, inviting people to sort of share what innovation they've seen elsewhere and using that as a way to capture some of those different ideas. And yeah, so I think we take that away and have a think about it. I think we get some of that, so things like willow sculptures and things like that. You know, there's people like Emma Bierman that we're meeting with, we're engaging with, who obviously bring some of that. But I think you're right, it'd be quite nice to make that wider, so we can certainly have a look at that. Yeah, and in terms of sort of the cost of play, it is really challenging, and we know that is a difficult aspect in terms of when we're designing playgrounds. Some things are easier to do. So, for example, double slides to allow carers, or if you've got space that that you can access, you can build like a slide into the landscape. It makes it easier for access than if you actually have to buy a very specific piece of equipment. But unfortunately, we're not controlling the market, so it is just a challenge that we have to work with, and I think keep working with the different sort of needs of different children and understanding what works best to make sure that when we make that investment, it might say it does X in the brochure, but actually do the children actually enjoy it when they've used it elsewhere? Is it actually going to have a purpose at the end of it? I think it's really important, and I think that's what Emma managed to do really well with the Lotherton playground that's come in this year. So yeah, that is a challenge that we're all facing.
Thank you, Councillor McCluskey.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the strategy. I really see improvement in our parks and certainly in Farnley and Wortley. I think part of that is down to the support of the friends groups who are really well supported by parks, and that really helps to contribute to the improvements. I also appreciate a focus on green spaces, because this is our big issue, and I'm sure it is across the city, particularly in the more social housing estates where there is nothing other than a bit of green space. And unfortunately, because they're so close to housing, they're very often used as car parks. How are we going to secure those green spaces for play? And in terms of the consultation, what if the consultation gets those people who want it kept as their car parks, or people who don't want groups of kids playing because of the noise and the threat, the perceived threat? And how will we involve the kids in that consultation? And there's a few other things that I wanted to pick up on, like the tennis courts, in terms of the funding seems to have stopped. I know it was funded through the Lawn Tennis Association, but we were left with people on a list, then being told there's no more money. And I'm just wondering how that's going to be addressed. And from a disability champion perspective, I love the images of the footpath with the tree roots through it at Tennant Hall Park, and then the lovely flat footpath. How is that achieved? Because every time we've asked for it in our parks, and I know this, the three parks throughout, you've got footpaths are just ripped up because of established trees. How are we going to smooth those out? Because they are a real barrier to people with disability. Thank you.
I'm really glad to hear that the sort of friends of groups working really well. And I think that, I mean, I go to the Leeds Parks Forum myself once a quarter, and I get that feedback a lot about that works really well with the different park members, you know, and there's always occasional issues and things that we have to iron out, but a lot of the time that relationship is working really well, and we are really grateful to all the volunteer support we get. It makes a massive difference to the parks and what we can do. So thank you for flagging that. In terms of the sort of housing and the car parking and things, I think I'd probably have to take that one away because it doesn't sort of sit specifically within my remit, and have a conversation with my equivalent for housing and how they do their tenant engagement and things. So we can take that away and have a specific sort of conversation around that. In terms of the consultation, that's always a bit of a challenging one, because we, you know, we can do targeted consultation with children, and you know, we've done the LQP, we've set up so that schools can actually do their own place efficiency assessment. So if there's a local school near a playground, we can certainly consult in a different way. But you know, you do, so I suppose if we do the consultation, there's an element of democracy. If residents that are around a green space are all saying they don't want a play area there, which we have had, then that's quite difficult. And I suppose we'd also look for support for ward members in terms of actually what voices are we listening to, and have we got a strong enough counter argument? If we've got 80% of people around that piece of land saying they don't want it, that is a difficult one. I suppose we'd have to work through those on a case by case scenario. And I suppose the important part would be to make sure that we've done enough outreach that, you know, that everybody who would be using that space has been involved in that process. So I think we'd look to work with specific ward members to make sure that they were comfortable that consultation was representative. In terms of the sort of path one, I mean, ultimately that is always linked back to limited money. We have now got discretionary capital, which we are trying to put towards sort of health and safety and looking at things like paths. I can't even begin to imagine how many miles or kilometres we have of paths across our estate. So it's always going to be a sort of gradual process, and I know we will always come to ward members and ask for support for funding for Section 106 or other funding you might have access to, because we don't have enough funding to get all of them right at the same time, and we'll just keep chipping away like we have with that example. In terms of the tennis courts, unless Emma can say any more, I think if, you know, ultimately we've worked through the funding, we look all the time for funding bids, and we will continue to do that across all the different sports and different grants, and try and find ways to bring in additional funding. But at this moment in time, you know, there's tennis courts that are still waiting. We haven't got any more funding, so unless, yeah, so.
That's Rafiq.
Yeah, just a couple of points. On the tennis courts, I think we were, you know, in terms of withdrawing funding from Lawn Tennis Association, we were one of the biggest beneficiaries. Managed to, I think, 11 or 12 parks across the city where we've managed to refurbish the tennis court. So, and we're, you know, like Polly said, we always look for that. But I think what we achieved is a big thing. You know, a lot of other councils will actually envy that. So. And one thing I think a number of colleagues have mentioned, the housing land. I mean, we've over the last 2 years managed to draw discretionary funding to update play areas within parks, which needed, you know, much needed improvements. And also, I think when it comes to new play areas, that's mainly down to Section 106 funding, which is controlled by board members. So if you feel, or any board member feel that there is a funding, or you can work with housing, and if you got Section 106 and you want something doing, then, you know, as a service, we'll be happy to look at that. But there isn't, you know, additional funding. If you got a piece of land within a housing area, then that's something, without identifying any additional funding, then, you know, we can't do much with it unless you've got obviously Section 106 or new development happening. I know if there's a new development of council housing, for instance, then there's the Section 106 that we can obviously do something about it, but it is very much down to funding. But I think given we've actually, like it was announced in the budget as well, but we point a record amount of funding to bring up to date some of our play areas which needed much improvement for a number of years. Yeah. Our financial position, we managed to inject extra capital.
Thank you, Councillor Rafiq. And I really appreciate people are getting really good tennis facilities. It's, you know, there's other people who were told they were on a list and we've got to go back to them. In terms of the 106 money, what we were discussing earlier is we are often not told that we've got 106 money, and it's getting that information. Councillor Hagan, I've just found out that there's been 106 money set dedicated to an area of Farnley and Wortley for years that we've only just found out about. So it's, yeah, 106 money should be used for the benefit of the community, not sitting in a pot doing nothing. But we're having difficulty finding out, establishing what is our 106 allocation.
I think that's we can definitely, you know, if you need that, what we can find out for you, and that's really up to you how you want to use that. That's completely it doesn't get spent without the ward members' consent, and we work on every scheme, work very closely with ward members on that. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure we'll be able to give you all the information. And apologise if you're not, you know, because all members know and can ask for, you know, if there are any balances within their wards. Yeah.
Ollie.
So with regard to Section 106 work, we are doing some work to work with ward members and how we do that liaison to make sure that it's more proactive. So we know that there's been a couple of instances where people haven't been aware and things, so we're trying to put a different process in place to make sure that that discussion happens and that we use it to best effect. So hopefully that will help to address any issues.
Thank you. Temitope, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, very briefly. Thank you very much, Chair. But just to reiterate what's been said, thank you for raising the point around social housing and space. And thank you to Councillor Rafiq for talking about the Section 106 money. Housing still sits in our directorate, so definitely connecting with Adam Compton and the rest of the team around that, as that really is a key priority for us as well. So thank you for raising that, and we can support.
Yes, and I think we're going to have something at the end of this discussion, aren't we, Becky, in terms of talking about how we can have consistency around the value of play and the role of green space in people's well-being, and that the mixed asset ownership can have a real impact on the quality of neighbourhoods, depending on the organisation which is in charge of green space. One of the things that I've tried as a local councillor is to encourage our local housing team to view estates as neighbourhoods and not just collections of properties that require internal and external improvements, and that actually they do sit within an environment, and that environment needs the occasional bit of investment. Can I ask also around resource, because we've mentioned quite a few projects today in our green spaces which are associated with money, and it feels that oftentimes the service is reactive because it doesn't have any funding of its own to think about where it wants to prioritise spending, and it can only justify spending in parks that, for instance, generate income, such as Lotherton Hall, or Golden Acre Park and their cafe, or Roundhay Park and Tropical World. And for some communities, it might feel that there's a two-speed operation happening in parks, that some parks look tip-top and others don't get any attention at all. So how are we going to look at making sure that there's some equity of attention for all the different community parks across the city? And you might want to talk about the audits that we were supposed to have in community parks that were discussed at the last scrutiny board, and the service said they were happy to commit to doing them, and then they stopped happening because a resource didn't happen to be continuing within the organisation. I wonder if there's opportunity for such audits, if there is a capacity issue, to be done in partnership with communities and community groups, because I know that there's an appetite for that, for instance, in my community. Sorry, that was many aspects in one question, but they are all interconnected, unfortunately. Thank you.
So I suppose the first thing to say is that when we do investments to help raise income, that income isn't ring fenced to that park. So if, for example, you know, some of the sites that you just referenced, like sort of Golden Acre or Lotherton, or actually that helps us to have the funding to maintain all our parks. So without those investments, and those investments don't come from a capital pot that can be used for anything else, they're done on an investor save basis, so they have to pay for themselves and they have to provide additional income. That additional income then underpins the overall parks budget, not the specific parks budget. So actually that is helpful to all parks, not just those individual ones. In terms of the sort of the challenge that we have is more around the difference between Section 106. So areas of the city that have Section 106, or where we've had like the Morley Town Fund, or where we're going to have the Pride of Place, there's obviously more opportunities to kind of move a park or an area onto a next level and do something different. What we do have, and what we've had for the last 2 years for the first time, is discretionary funding. So again, I bid into a pot for that for parks, and that's allowed us to get to the point where at least we are doing things like the path improvements that you saw, or you know, the improvement to Farnley Pond, or repairs and replacement of equipment in playgrounds where Section 106 doesn't exist. So it has tried to level some of that discrepancy, but the discrepancy was more between those parks that could benefit from Section 106 and those that couldn't. In terms of the workforce that work in the parks, there isn't, you know, that's done on a revenue basis, so that isn't different. And so that discretionary funding's been the main difference. The team worked really hard to try and bring in funding, so from any of the grants that are around, or from the sports or organisations, and we try to spread that across the city and where the need is the biggest and where we know we haven't got any other funding. But you know, at the end of the day, we are looking after a mass of land, and I think we have seen an improvement over the last couple of years in the parks, but it doesn't happen overnight, and I think it's a slow journey, but I do think they're going in the right direction. So.
And the audits?
I didn't do that on purpose. I presume you're talking specifically about the accessibility audits.
Well, the audits were interested in improving accessibility for people who were disabled, or improving the environment for women and girls, because we did do that piece with Leeds University, and we wanted to apply that knowledge in a practical manner. But it was also about identifying in parks what worked well and what we needed future attention for, so that if money did arrive through things like Section 106, we were actually ready to apply that funding to an investment that had already been identified. So that's where that is useful in terms of preempting stuff.
So I think there's two things in there. Then there's the accessibility audits and the plan on the page. The plan on the page is the one at the last scrutiny meeting we said we were stopping, and that was as a budget saving. We have had certain friends groups who've actually said that they would like to still do that, and we will support any of the community groups that want to do that, so it won't be a barrier. And obviously, if there is income coming in, so again, Pride of Place will be the obvious example at the moment, we'd work in those areas to help develop a sort of strategy for those parks or green spaces. In terms of accessibility audits, that has been a bit stop-start, and we did ask for, I think last time we were here, we asked any ward members to come back to us with, if they've got volunteers or people that'd like support, and we've not had anybody come back to us. In the interim, we did some work with some landscape architects at one of the universities, and we are looking to see whether we could go back to them as well to help us do that in terms of some of their practical work that they do, to do some of that assessment, to try and get a bit more pace into it. But we're always happy to work with volunteers, but if I'm honest, we haven't been flooded with volunteers to this point, but if that's changed, then that would be great.
Councillor Cunningham.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you for the report. Pardon for the pun, but I'd like to dig down into the sand issue. I'm really delighted to see sand mentioned quite a few times in the report, because we know that it's such an accessible form of play. In my experience in Armley, for the last 10 years, we've asked about sand for play quite a number of times, and we've often been met with kind of health and safety objections. So I just wondered how we were rethinking that in Leeds so that we can make the possibility of sand play a reality. And also thinking about that in Leeds, we're very lucky to have the social enterprise Playful Anywhere that looks at innovations in play around the city. And I just wondered how much we're working alongside them with our improvements in play in the city. Thank you.
Don't think some of the health and safety issues have gone away, so I've not got a magic wand, and obviously the big challenge is still around sort of animal excrement and things. Where we've managed to do it has been more, so for example at the Aryan playground, and the reason that we've managed to do that is because actually we closed that down, and it has more constant monitoring, and it has staff on site. There's another area where we're looking at a playground that might be open access, but again, with sort of fencing on an evening, which isn't obviously what we do in our community parks, where again, it might be doable. I still think it would be a real struggle in some of our community parks, but we'll continue to look and see. And if you've got examples where you think that has worked elsewhere across the sort of other communities or other cities, if you want to share any of those examples with me about how that's what I'd be really interested. So I think we're at the point where we're saying, okay, this is what we have done, and if there's challenges like that, we're kind of let's listen and let's explore that and see if there is a way of making it work, rather than just saying we're not going to do it. So and then Playful Anywhere is that Emma Bim? Yeah, sorry. So I've met with her last week or 2 weeks ago, just to sort of understand how we could work together. Vicky Marsden, who's led on the play strategy, who also worked in children's on play, she has a kind of established relationship. So and Emma is also on the play sufficiency board in terms of commenting on what we're doing. So she made some suggestions to me, some similar to Councillor Thompson, about the sort of willow sculptures and things that actually maybe we could do, and just do something different and actually quite low cost that would give that sort of more playful air. So those conversations have been going on with the team for a long while. I've only just started having those more directly, but I am interested in how we pursue that and challenge ourselves to be a bit different.
Councillor Haig.
Thank you. I think we talked a lot about play in parks and green spaces and how we can develop that, and that's very positive. But I'm aware that many parts of the city, there are areas where there's not any sufficient green space or parks, but I feel that doesn't mean there shouldn't be opportunities for play, and that might be, and how we might develop that. I'm also conscious that although some of those are public housing or private housing, some of them are large developments like blocks of flats, or Leeds Dock used to have a play area, and the owners removed it. There's no play in that part of the city. For children, and many young children we do have now living in private flats in the city centre. And if you visit perhaps other parts of Europe, you'll see where there's intense housing like that, there will be play areas for certainly young children. So what can we do to develop play where it's more challenging than converting a piece of grass or for natural play, or installing a playground in a park where it's and actually the irony is you can see that there's no play opportunities for children somewhere, but there might be a play park for dogs.
Probably slightly beyond my remit in some ways in terms of what I can influence, but I suppose what we're trying to do with the play principles is work with colleagues in planning, which is I suppose where the main influence is. However, I will say at the new Air Park there will be a city centre playground in amongst all that sort of high-rise accommodation there, and that was part of the planning application, that actually that park and that green space was really critical in terms of making that new housing family friendly, and so at the moment that's still being developed, but there will be a play area there. So.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Just shifting slightly to bridleways. Being in outer wards, we have quite a few, and the just one particular challenge that we're finding, not wanting to bring it as casework, but just as an example, is how we manage where there's shared use, where it provides both vehicle access and active travel for cyclists, horse riders and pedestrians walking to school, and how we kind of juggle that and manage it and those shared responsibilities. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that. Thank you.
I mean, bridleway, if it is a bridleway, it shouldn't have access for vehicles. So we'd need to manage that. Yeah, so it depends what kind of a public right of way it is, but bridleways are just for horses, bikes and on foot.
It maybe is a fairly unusual example. I'll follow up separately. It may be that it doesn't happen elsewhere, that it's just us that have this peculiar case. Thank you.
I think some bridleways are actually green lanes, so there is vehicle access. I think there's a difference there. It might be useful to understand, but I think that might be what Councillor Thompson's referring to.
Thank you, that's helpful. Final question from me. One of the things that's been mentioned today is tennis courts and how you can get envy looking at other areas that get investment because it looks good, but also it's effective. So one of the things that we've noticed in Rothwell with our investment in our tennis courts is that they are used far more often and for a longer period of time. How do we, for instance, as communities with community parks, extend the life of a park after dark? Because there are lots of people who wish to exercise in the open air, can't afford to have gym memberships where they can exercise indoors, and actually by making parks used more often for a longer period and on an evening, it actually makes them safer. So how would we have conversations around putting extra lighting, for instance, in certain parts of parks going forward, so that people who work during the day, for instance, might have the opportunity to use their parks during the week and not just on a weekend?
It's a real dilemma. So, that there's lots of different things to balance. So, we often get asked about lighting up paths through parks, and there's some real health and safety risks with that. So lighting up a park doesn't make it naturally safe unless you get the volume of people, but it can make people think it's safe. It actually can allow people to hide in shadows, and actually the person who's walking on the path is even more vulnerable than they were beforehand. So it's definitely got to only be done in the absolute right places and where you've got that guarantee of volume of people, because there is a risk. There's a risk from a biodiversity point of view. We have very few. We talk about sort of limited green spaces, but actually the green spaces, especially at night, is where the biodiversity is gathering and allows some of the natural cycles to happen. If we start to light those up longer, it will have an impact at a time where we do need to be looking at reversing the biodiversity decline. So it's a difficult question to end on, Councillor Gold.
So to clarify the question, how do you have those conversations?
There's a funding implication. So I think the first question you will always get asked is about the funding, and there's an ongoing cost to it in terms of the energy bills, and the sort of lights that you use for things like tennis courts are expensive, and connectivity. I think if there's a specific case study or a specific area, we can have a look at it. But it's not something that we are embracing as a policy at the moment, I would say.
Councillor Rafiq.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the summer when it's a warmer days, longer evenings, people can, the lighting isn't required. But I think the on the flip side, where the problem with lighting is that it can, in some areas, I'm not saying everywhere, can attract where it's literally closer to residential areas, antisocial behaviour as well, and people staying out late. So it's a very fine thing to juggle as well, apart from obviously identifying funding as well. So on one side, people will say, yes, we want lighting, and then you'll have others actually objecting to it because it's close to where they live. Similarly, if you got a new play area, and I can give an example closer to where I represent in a new estate development, where some people think that because that was part of the original development, that albeit a very minority view, but that there shouldn't be a play area because it's going to cause noise and nuisance and all that. So it's a very difficult kind of act to balance, like Polly's said, both in terms of funding, but also people's views as well, whether they should be lighting or not.
Yes, and it's nice to be able to have a conversation about it instead of just being told why stuff can't happen. Anyway, on that note, we would love to close down this discussion. Thank you very much. We've given it extended time because parks and green spaces are, of course, central to what makes the identity of communities and neighbourhoods, and everybody around the table has a stake in making sure that they're looked after going forward. But in conclusion, we've got some areas for discussion going forward, but most importantly, I think the message that needs to go back is we're all very grateful as people who represent communities for all the hard work that the Parks team does do, and we appreciate the frustrations that you have as well as the ones that we have in terms of getting the best job out of our assets that we have locally. So thank you for your attendance today. We're now going to move on to the next item, which is tackling inequality and disadvantage, developing the priority ward approach. For this item, we have Councillor Asghar Khan, who is the executive member. Dr. Temitope Adamosu is staying with us, and Paul Money is joining us, who is the Chief Officer for Safer, Stronger Communities, and Stuart Byrne, who is the locality's Programme Manager. You're all very welcome. Who would like to introduce this item?
I will start, Chair, and thank you, Chair. This report updates the Scrutiny board this morning. What fantastic work is being delivered by our locality team across Leeds. Can I start by thanking all the officers who have been involved in this? In the report, there is a lot of information contained, including the latest index of multiple deprivation, the implementation of the priority ward partnership plans. Can't get my tongue in teeth actually. So the reduction of community committees from 8 to 10 to 8, and the integration of 4 priority pride and places neighbourhood into our locality approach. This approach would not happen without our third sector partners, local community representatives, and the Leeds community anchor networks. These relationships are greatly valued, and I will hand over to officers to run through the report in more details. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Khan, and thank you for the opportunity to come to the Scrutiny Board to talk about this report. It's timely in the sense that we are due to go to Executive Board in April with the paper, or a version of this paper, and the feedback from today's session will be incorporated within that particular developing piece of work for Exec Board. I think Councillor Khan has covered the broad themes in terms of the areas that the report covers. Perhaps, if I may, I just wanted to maybe reinforce the significant value of our partnership working. It was referenced by Councillor Khan, but the communities team is a very small team. Most of you know colleagues in this particular team due to work that we do, working with members specifically, but it is very much about a council, statutory services and third sector and community partnership. That's what's at the heart of our work in this particular area. There has been a significant development since we last had a conversation at a forum like this in terms of our locality working, not least in terms of the evolving nature of the work that we're doing, but also the development of the Pride in Place initiatives, of which we have 4, which dovetail nicely in terms of our locality working agenda, and in particular our focus on supporting local communities, empowering them to ensure that where new funds and new resources are allocated, it's done based on what that community need looks like. And the best people to tell us about that are those communities themselves. This piece of work also links really significantly, of course, with the Leeds ambition around thriving communities. Perhaps I'll leave it there in terms of any further context, and unless there's any comments from my colleague Stuart, invite questions and comment.
Any questions from members? I'll start you one. Yes, Pride in Place. It's always welcome to get extra money from government. However, there is a value in local decision making, so that decisions are best made the closer they are to the neighbourhoods and communities that they're meant to be benefiting. However, the government has come in with Pride in Place and mandated where we spend that money, and we already have a priority neighbourhoods model, which has a danger of saying, because we're spending more attention on some communities that are priorities, other communities are less of a priority. Does Pride in Place actually make that worse? Because we've now got extra places that we have to have for priorities, but we haven't actually got any extra people to do the work, at least for the time being. So how are we going to ensure that the money spent in Pride in Place isn't going to be a benefit to just one community and it isn't a detriment elsewhere?
Thanks, Councillor Galton, for that. And on one level, of course, you are right in terms of Pride in Place attracting some additional funding for those 4 areas. We haven't had that type of funding support for our wider priority ward activity, but have looked instead to think about how to best use our collective assets to work in a targeted and focused way in terms of delivering better outcomes, I think, for our residents. And I think as a consequence of our work programme on priority wards, which started back in, I think, 2017, we are looking always for opportunities to ensure that where we can, there's a citywide benefit, recognising that Priority awards actually focused on the bottom 1% areas in the IMD data set, but we recognise and always have recognised that there are pockets of deprivation, inequality, and always have been in other parts of the city that don't necessarily feature in that type of data set, but that also that there's emerging trends in terms of particular wards or super output areas. So we work as closely as we can with the data that we've got and the information that we have access to ensure that we are as responsive as we can be to challenges citywide. That'd be my opening gambit in terms of response. My colleague Stuart has worked much more at the coalface in terms of this area of work, so I will just pause in case Stuart there's any more detail you'd want to add.
Thanks, Paul. Sorry. Yeah, I think learning within the approach to locality working has always been key. There's always been the citywide approach, of which it works through with all of yourselves through the community committee structures. There is learning that has been taken from the priority wards around specific areas such as the partnership working that's been done in areas like Hare Hills, around the Clayhole Build, around looking at problem solving groups around crime and antisocial behaviour, which we've now taken that learning, those approaches to broader areas. In the recent budget announcement, there has been discussion of the new environmental approaches that we're working up with colleagues in environmental services, which will be much more of a citywide approach. So the learning is very much central to the way that we do work within priority wards.
Temitope.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to what's already been said, you'll be aware we've got the 4 pillars in the council plan, of which one of them is the localities. And that absolutely means that we are concentrating and looking across all the wards, applying that universal proportionalism, which is that we're equitably looking at every single ward and thinking about how we're bringing all of our services together to support each of the wards. So that way, no ward will be left behind. And lots of the learning that we've got from the priority ward and the work that we've already done will be applied to that as well.
Thank you. Councillor Khan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just briefly on the, you mentioned about the Pride in Place initiative. With the extra money, the council will be looking after for 2 to 3 years on the delivery plan as well, and helping empowering the neighbourhood independent chairs. So hopefully by working together, we will have some extra staff as well through that funding.
I look forward to the trickle-down effect, because in the recent deprivation statistics, which showed that deprivation had improved in some of those priority wards where we'd put attention in, it also demonstrated that in some parts of the city, deprivation had actually got worse. And one of those wards was mine. And when I asked what extra attention we would now expect to get due to that deterioration, I was told nothing. So I'm looking forward to this ward-based equity that was mentioned just now being delivered under your new direction, Temitope. Councillor Haig.
Thank you. And I think it's always important that we remember that deprivation is always in relative terms, so it's always measured in comparison to others. So we also want to be looking at the sort of general direction of travel. I think the localities approach has demonstrated its value in priority neighbourhoods, in lifting some of those further up out of the deprivation, those measures of deprivation. That can only be good news, and very much welcome the extensions, not through something that the council's chosen particularly, but through a government initiative, which is bringing extra investment. So it's not taking away from anyone else. The money is coming from an external source to do it. And certainly in mine and Councillor Custy's ward, where we're looking at part of the ward within the Pride in Place, we see the benefits spreading across the whole ward, and also us being able to go use our community committee work to make sure that everybody in our ward and beyond perhaps is included in some of the benefits of that. So really, my question is, when we're looking at these initiatives across the city, are we lifting the whole of the city up? I think that's what you were trying to say. We're lifting the whole of the city up by having these interventions, learning, and as the council can find resources, being able to bring some of that approach, even if it's within existing resource. Because what we do know is, I hope you'll agree, that the council can't deliver it on its own. We have to work with communities, and perhaps the investment in building up those communities will reap the dividends in terms of making our money go a little further. I'm getting nods, but I suppose that's kind of the question.
Yeah, thanks for that. Well, for those comments initially, Councillor Haig, about the value, I think, of our efforts over recent years to work in that targeted way with elected members as well. I don't think any of us would profess to saying that's been the answer then to the reduction in 1% areas in the city. There's clearly things going on a micro scale here, but we do feel and see a sense of benefit in areas. But as Councillor said, and as other members have said to us often, you know, this, and I guess I was really grateful for the comments that have just been made about our work on locality working within the constraints of the council plan. Locality working is one of the 4 themed areas and is very much about a citywide approach. And I think, you know, in terms of your observation, Councillor Galton, that the answer to you was, well, nothing will be happening in Rothwell. I don't think that will be the case, but clearly we do need to have that citywide focus. One of the questions I just heard in the previous session, interestingly enough, was around, I think it was yourself, Councillor McCluskey, around access to community pots of funding. 106, ward-based initiatives, SIL. One of the areas and opportunities I think we do have strikes right at the heart of what you were talking about, really, is being much more transparent about where that money sits and being able to access it in a way that's easier than what we currently have for the benefit of our local communities. And that's one of the areas within our broader locality working programme that we are looking at really closely, and couldn't help but think about it as you mentioned it in the previous session. But there are other things, and we will be looking to take that forward and ensure there is that trickle down, Councillor Galton, that you've referenced.
Councillor McCluskey, did you want to ask a question?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report and the work that the locality model has achieved. I suppose going back to Pride in Place, and we've got 4 areas. 2 areas are currently priority areas, and we note, or I've noted from a non-priority area such as East Farnley or Farnley East, that in the priority areas, community structures are already established, and with this Pride in Place money going in, whereas the non-areas, well, I can only account for Farnley East. The community is disparate. It's never been invested in. And how are we going to get some sort of community cohesion or get that force to get people interested and pride in their community?
It's a really good question, Councillor Kluski, not one that's we've not thought about already. Middleton Park Avenue is another area where we've not been working in that intensive way that where we have in other areas. And what I think we're looking to do, and I hope that's evidenced by the visit to your particular area that I and other colleagues were involved in, including colleagues from MHCLG, is we are looking to provide in the best way we can support to those areas to develop that that local infrastructure, because it's typically there. It just hasn't had the attention that's been in place in other areas. But work particularly with local members in a way that is about enabling that capacity to come to the fore without any sense of perception of or threat of this is about the council wanting to do things in their way. So I think we talked about that quite a lot in the session with yourself and Councillor Haig. We really do recognise the sense here is about community power and about empowering a local area to do what they know is right for their area, and we are facilitating that, not in any way trying to constrain it. I do recognise the point you've made. There's perhaps a bit more work to do in your area and also Middleton Park Avenue area, but we're focused and we are actually doing that.
I'd also say one of the other aspects that we have is the community anchor network within the city. So that it's not equally developed across the city, but there is certainly learning, and one of the key things that for us as a team is that working with our third sector partners and building on the localised strengths. So there is experience from those other priority areas, which I believe colleagues will be able to bring into your ward around the Pride in Place partnership to quickly put some of those structures in place and strengthen what's already there.
Councillor Renshaw.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just be interested to know how you actually assess which are the poorest areas of the city. I know the city centre area is always categorised into it, but when I spoke to the local vicar who asked me what sort of area do you think we're in at the moment, and I answered, he said you'd be surprised because most of them are deprived families. So whether or not those are both the same as the way you monitor it, now the churches monitor it, I don't know. And then just following on from Section 106 money and ward-based initiative, it would be a lot easier if we could get through to somebody to speak to. There's no phone number, you can't talk to anybody, you've got to do it by email and then wait 4 days, 5 days before you get a reply. And it could be something that's got a time scale to it, especially at the moment, and you can't get hold of that person. And then 10 days later you find, oh no, you can't contribute that, it's been rejected. And you have to go back to the beginning. It's like playing snakes and ladder. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Renshaw, for your comments there. In terms of the identification of the areas, I think going back to 2017, a decision was made at Executive Board that in terms of the priority areas, we would work from the data set around deprived communities. The data set's been recently refreshed last year, so the IMD data and the 1% areas. What we realised was that through the learning from that process, whilst those super output areas do feature in those data sets, actually the broader focus and the broader benefit is derived from doing exactly what Councillor Haig was talking about, which was to think about it in the context of the ward, because it's us that recognise the boundaries for obvious reasons, but to our public and our residents, often those boundaries don't mean the same. So that's how the areas were identified. We've also looked at enhancing our data sets to inform our decision making. So we've used something called social progress index data as well to help inform what's happening and to try to do Councillor Galton was talking about there, which is the real issue of dynamic trends and changes in terms of areas. So we're trying to track that as well. It's not the easiest thing to do because some of this as well comes down to perceptions and community assets and a whole range of other factors. But we think we've got a reasonable appraisal of inequality, deprivation and disadvantage in the city. But that specifically is the way that we went through the priority ward approach. We were directed to do so by executive board. And on your point about the funding pots, all I would do is agree with what you've said. We think there's a way of simplifying that. We think there's a way of working in a more streamlined way. We hope there are some legal implications with this as well as procedural, but we're keen to pick it up within the locality working theme. We're keen to do something quickly on it, recognising that some of the opportunities will be perhaps more longitudinal in terms of when we can bring them to the fore. We think that is one that we can do something sooner on, and we will look to do that as quickly as we can and keep this board and members appraised as we move forwards.
Can I just add that it's a bit frustrating when you can't get hold of the same person to carry on whatever request you're putting in, and so it's like bang your head on a wall.
Yeah, just say I think there's an opportunity for us to be more integrated in terms of the way that we work, and it shouldn't be about a person. It should be about a process that operates. You know, whenever that person might not be available, it's not really configured in the way that we think it could be. So take your feedback, and we're very much alive to it.
Thank you, Councillor Cunningham.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you. Yeah, it's just going back to the point about some communities and maybe not seeing the same amount of integration with community groups, and it's just a question around around the knowledge of that, because I would argue that in lots of communities the people are there, and so for example people might point to Armley and say, you know, that there are a lot of community organisations already in place, but the root of those were residents and were the community. They weren't council led initially. So my argument would be that those people are there, it's how we seek them out. They'll be at the places they're at, not at the places we want them to be. So they'll be at the playgroups, they'll be at the coffee mornings in churches. And I think it's just about reframing that power element, because I think that power is often already there. And I think we have to embrace that rather than think that we're taking ownership of it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Cunningham. I mean, I would agree entirely with that. I kind of made the kind of loose reference to that in response to the Pride in Place conversation about infrastructure, where I think I said we know it's there. There may be elements of support that we can provide to bring to coalesce that support and bring together all the assets within a local community, but they're definitely there, and we recognise that, and we do work, as you know, I think, really closely with third sector organisations, but in particular third sector infrastructure organisations such as Voluntary Action Leeds. So we do have a good appreciation, I think, of that asset base, if I can put it like that, and absolutely want to work in the way that you've talked about, Councillor Cunningham, because I think for too long there's either been an approach or at least a perception that this is not a level playing field in terms of equitable stakeholders. In our priority neighbourhood work, I don't think we're seeing that now. I think we are seeing genuinely everybody working on the same level playing field, and that power dynamic I don't think has played out as much as it may have done in the past, and I think we've just got to keep working on that. And that whole ethos concept of community power is something that we're really keen to ensure it runs right through our work on locality working, and that we bring to life that that potential, Councillor Cunningham, that you are talking about.
Can I just ask, because we were involved in the community committee review, how you intend to improve that community interface and engagement and integration on a universal scale across the city, when the number of community committees has reduced, their frequency of meetings has reduced, their financial management means that if you want to ask for some funding for a local event, you need to place it 6 months before the event actually happens. The localities team has reduced. They're focused on work in pride in place. How are we going to physically improve that interaction and interface with communities and third sector partners if we don't have enough frequency of opportunity to have those conversations?
Yeah, thanks for that, Councillor Colton. And of course you are right. There has been a reduction in the number of committees, and there has been a reduction in terms of the resources within our communities arrangements. And I think we know why, in terms of some of the sort of financial challenges that we are experiencing and continue to experience. Having said that, I think that the way we mitigate those kind of issues is by seeking to work in a couple of areas, more definitively. One is to deliver the recommendations within the community committee review, and that is a process that we are working on, and we were and are grateful for the support this scrutiny board provided us with regards to arriving at those recommendations, and continue to provide support to us around. The other big opportunity, I think, strikes perhaps at the heart of some of what Councillor Cunningham was talking about, and what's been referenced before, is about we need to find ways of working in a more integrated, smarter way together, and that absolutely is what we're seeking to do. And I think sometimes there is a sense that the local authority, being as big and as complex as it is, isn't yet as integrated as it could be. I know that probably in terms of a top line objective for our locality working council plan theme, that's probably it. How do we just start to work in a more seamless way together? Because actually, taken together, there is still lots and lots of potential, not just in terms of the council resources, but also those resources that Councillor Cunningham was talking about. So I think the chief mitigation to that threat that you've highlighted, Councillor Galton, is absolutely being focused on how can we work more closely together, and to that degree, how can council officers work more closely together with members and community committees. And that, I think, is the big opportunity in front of us, because there are ways we can do that, and you see those frustrations all the time. That would be certainly in terms of my initial response, without recoiling away from the very fact about there is reduced resource in this particular area. But it's not just about the community's team, it's about the wider partnership, and that is where I think the power and potential still sits.
Thank you, Councillor Khan.
Yeah, just follow on from Paul Murray. Just on the community committee, you're right, actually. But however, we've got some delivery groups where those delivery groups will be able to have extra meetings within those themes. So there is opportunity within the community committees to have those extra meetings and focus within those priorities, within those themes.
Thank you. And one of the things we have noted is the government is also very interested in having a neighbourhood health model, which is all about making sure that neighbourhoods are working more effectively to get better outcomes. And that is something which is being developed and will be monitored through a different scrutiny board, but we will be involved going forward from the scrutiny board too. That now draws our conclusion to our discussion. So thank you very much. First of all, not just for your attendance today, because we really do appreciate the opportunity to have that discourse with you, but more generally for all the excellent work which is delivered by your teams within those communities. I think the expression of the frustration today, sometimes from some communities, is that they appreciate the value that it delivers, and we'd all like to have a little bit more of it. Okay, thank you very much. We're moving on to our next item, which is, if I get there, Leeds Hate Crime Strategy, which is the strategy which we're going to be carrying on. It started in 2025 and it's going on to 2028. So this is an update. We have had a previous discussion around hate crime. We had a deep dive because it's something which we take very seriously, not just on this scrutiny board, but generally on Leeds City Council. And we welcome the opportunity to have another discussion on it that Councillor Khan has offered us, as he wants to show that our interaction has had impact on the report which is going to go to the next executive board in April. Anyway, joining us today to have that discussion is Councillor Khan himself. We have Dr. Temitope staying with us, and we have Paul Money staying with us, Andy Birkbeck, Jeff Turnbull, who is the head of EDI management. Sorry, I forgot to mention that Andy Birkbeck is fresh in the role as head of community relations and cohesion. And also we have Inspector Crabtree joining us from West Yorkshire Police. You're all very welcome. Who'd like to introduce the item?
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to bring this refreshed hate crime strategy to Scrutiny Board today. Given the significance of this issue in the current climate, this strategy matters because it's about the safety, confidence and the well-being of people in Leeds, and about how we work together to ensure everyone can live freely from hate and prejudice. I will ask Andy to briefly introduce the report. Over to you, Andy.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. We know that hate crime and prejudice has a real impact on individuals and communities. And this refreshed Leeds hate crime, developed in partnership with colleagues in West Yorkshire Police, sets out a new sort of strengthened citywide offer to preventing hate crime, really tailored around increasing reporting, supporting victims and building community confidence. It's important to note the lineage between the previous strategy. Whilst the priorities haven't changed, the environment has, unfortunately, and we're currently seeing a rise in online abuse, anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim prejudice, misogyny, and also national and international events that certainly have an effect on our communities, sometimes overnight. We only saw the events of last weekend as a proof of how that can quickly transfer into Leeds. The strategy has a greater emphasis on delivery and accountability, but ultimately at its heart, it's a people strategy. Very informed, an emphasis on trauma and trauma-informed practice, but also how the victims feel and responded to around hate crime. So that's one of the big pivots in the strategy. We're also trying to use data and intelligence a lot better through quarterly reporting around hate crime. But particularly the focus of the strategy goes beyond enforcement, which perhaps was the previous strategy's main aim. We want to link this more broadly to cohesion, which links to the previous conversation we've just had, but certainly to the broader Leeds ambitions around belonging, feeling safe and confident in our community. As part of this session, we'd certainly welcome Scrutiny Board's continued dialogue on this issue. We had a great deep dive, well, before my time, but there was a great deep dive, to quote the paper, in December on this. But we'd like to get members' feedback ahead of going to Executive Board in April. And we'd also welcome your thoughts on how this could be monitored, because it's important that it's not just about a strategy, it's about how we measure the doing part of it. With your indulgence, Chair, I'd just like to bring in my colleague, Jeff Turnbull, just on some of the more finite practicalities around the report. But yeah, we really welcome Scrutiny's discussion on this item. Conscious of time as well, but really welcome that.
Good morning, everyone. Well, good afternoon now. I think we're past the past midday. So Just a little bit more detail to guide councillors' questions and discussion on this issue. In terms of consultation and how we've consulted in order to produce this latest version of the hate crime strategy, we engaged with communities and partner organisations out there in the city during Hate Crime Awareness Week, Islamophobia Awareness Month, and other community-facing activity that we've undertaken. So that was really getting out there and talking to people literally on the street sometimes at some of our events about the previous strategy and about what people felt that their priorities were. We then also ran a formal consultation with Strategic Board and the operational group and all our third-party reporting centres to get their input on a formal level. Obviously, that included consultation engagement with our key partners, West Yorkshire Police. We also reviewed all the latest data that we had available, performance reports, and some of that information has previously been brought to Scrutiny Board, and looked at some detailed work that had taken place in some areas around hate. For example, in 2024, there was an LGBT plus community safety survey. So we did that trawl through there. In terms of the key messages we heard, clearer accountability and stronger governance was something that was fed back to us. Victims wanting more consistent trauma-informed support, more prevention work, education and tackling misinformation, and partners wanting faster, more coordinated responses when tensions rise or events trigger local spikes. So just a couple of lines on some of the key things that have changed in terms of this new strategy from the last one. So we have much clearer actions with named leads and outcomes, so everyone knows what their responsibilities are and also what people consider success will look like. So we're developing a delivery plan that will set alongside the strategy, and you'll see that there are 5 priority areas within the strategy, and currently Hate Crime Operational Group are working through those 5 areas in terms of the detail there. So our governance has been strengthened, and we've really looked at the modern hate crime picture. So I'm sure councillors will be aware that a lot has changed in the last few years. We've seen a significant rise in terms of online hate. We've seen some significant tensions developing through international, national events. And that's fed into some particular pressure points in terms of hate crime, particularly around anti-Semitism, about anti-Muslim prejudice, with our trans community in terms of hate directed against them. Lived experience we really want to build built in, so it's about talking more closely on this with, for example, our Equality Assembly and our hubs, and we've been out to all of the hubs with the proposals for the new strategy, so we get that lived experience. It's not just data driven. In terms of those priority areas, it's all in the strategy, but building our understanding of hate crime, preventing hate crime, increasing the reporting of hate crime, responding to hate crime in our communities where it takes place, and then improving support for victims remain the same priorities as we had before. What's different is the strengthening of some of the activity that sits under that. Some of it wasn't necessarily as clear as it could have been last time. Some of it necessarily wasn't clear who was taking ownership of delivering some of those actions. So that's where the real work's gone into in order to address some of those challenges. What I will say is that people were broadly supportive of those priorities and continue to support those priorities, and I think they're pretty comprehensive in terms of the overall picture. But I'll leave it there, Chair, and for now.
Thank you, Jeff. That explanation was very helpful. Councillor Cunningham.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you for the report. I'm just interested, as part of the kind of education side, which also potentially links into accountability and victim support, are you engaging any kind of restorative justice practices? That's maybe more towards the police side of things. And if so, are they being used to help to educate people going forward? Thank you.
Hello. If I'm honest, I'm not 100% sure. Under 18s would certainly have access to restorative justice. As an adult, I couldn't answer that question without having a look at it, I'm afraid.
Does anybody else wish to come in? Paul, you looked.
Yeah, I think obviously our policing colleagues play out a particular role in terms of hate crime, support the partnership extensively, but are very heavily involved in the investigation work. I think as referenced by Jeff in terms of the strategy and the focus on supporting victims, but also thinking about restorative practice in that wider general sense. It certainly sits as a central theme in terms of Safer Leeds and the work that we do, because it's intrinsically linked to reducing reoffending. So there is a real focus, a real close working relationship with our colleagues in children and families, for instance, where some of the expertise for this has historically sat. So we will explore as a priority in every instance whether a restorative practice approach may be preferential in terms of resolving some of our issues. It sits at the heart of our prevention agenda, particularly working in education settings with children in their formative years. So these are really difficult conversations to have often, but we are working closely across that wider partnership beyond perhaps our really close working relationship with the police to ensure that restorative practice is fundamental in terms of our approach.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just thinking, kind of, especially for the younger people, how quickly messages spread on social media, and how once those messages are out there, it's really hard to reel that back and get the balance correct again.
Yes.
Yeah, so working with schools is really key to our approach. So we have a current reporting system for schools, but we've done a lot of work communicating with schools around the ones that are using it, and also going out to the ones that haven't been using it. And if they're not using our system, how are they recording this? So we're going to be launching a new schools hate reporting process this year, which is really based on schools' feedback. Consistently, what we get from the entire sector and all the partners in it is that schools and education is absolutely key to this. Young people are obviously being subjected to significant amounts of information, and there's worrying data in terms of younger people's attitudes. The current generation of younger people have more worrying concerns. I'll give you misogyny as an example. There's some really worrying data out there in terms of boys, in terms of their attitudes to misogyny, which is significantly worse than the previous generations. So schools is absolutely key, and also working with schools in terms of even if it's not through the criminal justice system, restorative can work across education settings in terms of how those young people are worked with, involving parents and all those sorts of conversations.
Paul? Yeah, if I may just add, I think Councillor Cunningham's really struck on a really significant issue, particularly misinformation and disinformation as it plays out on social media. The speed of it really creates a challenge for us, if I'm honest, and I wouldn't be honest with you if I said, yeah, we've cracked this one. But what we have done is we are looking at various initiatives that are taking place in other cities, looking for best practice in terms of how we are more responsive to ensuring that misinformation and disinformation is not left to sit there and impact, particularly on children. So there have been some examples, I think, in terms of work that Jeff and the team in particular have looked at around rumour busting, and some of that stuff's come from our engagement with European cities, and some of it we've seen in pockets across the UK. But I think traditionally for organisations like the council, like the police, with traditional sort of media and communication setups, we need to move with the times and be much more nimble around that social media messaging, because that's to some degree primarily where our young people in particular are getting their information from. I don't know, Jeff, if you can add any more to the rumour stuff we've been doing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're always seeking out best practice and working with partners wherever possible. Some of the work we've been doing through Intercultural Cities has been really valuable. Councillors will undoubtedly have seen, and we've discussed it through different forums over the last 12 months, our anti-discrimination campaign. I'm really pleased to see in a huge billboard in Armley on that campaign as we've kind of started taking that campaign further out from the city centre. What was really interesting about that was we didn't get the anticipated backlash on social media, or indeed generally, from when that campaign launched. And I think it was partly because, one, it's quite a hard thing to argue against without being blatantly discriminatory when you're saying, you know, racism is bad, stop doing it. But also, I think there was a certain amount of people being surprised actually at the bluntness of the messaging, and the fact that we were taking a really strong line on it. So work, there's more work to do on it. So, for example, working with the universities to understand what's happening here in Leeds and get some research done on that is one of the things we want to prioritise, rather than just relying on national picture. Around things like misinformation and around what's happening in our local neighbourhoods. So yeah, we've done some good work, but there's still more work to do.
Thank you very much. Councillor McCluskey.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the paper, and it's great we are extending the hate crime strategy. I have two questions to it. The first one, this is our hate crime, this city's hate crime strategy. You mentioned it, Jeff. Why haven't we included misogyny? I know it's not a nationally it's not a protected characteristic, but this was an opportunity that we could include misogyny as a hate crime and be a leading light in the country.
Well, there's a couple of different levels to my answer to that. Firstly, it is included. It is referenced in the paper. It's definitely in the delivery plan. So in terms of, so for example, Stop Hate UK, who are our third-party reporting partners, they will take reports of hate crime, hate incidents, in terms of people referring that to them around disability and around age, neither of which are within the national legislative framework. Obviously, that's challenging in terms of data, because the data that we're using is obviously from West Yorkshire Police colleagues, you know, at that high level. We do have other data from other third-party reporting. So we do have that, and particularly the support element then is there. So Stop Hate UK will provide support. There are other organisations that also provide support around misogyny, around age-related. You know, we've had similar conversations as not just disability, around, you know, Leeds Older People's Forum, and particularly, you know, age-related hate incidents as well. I would entirely agree that from a national perspective, misogyny is something that should be included. That is our position. I'm also currently chairing the Council's Misogyny Working Group. It's absolutely the sector's position on misogyny. Is one of their key asks. And we'll be taking a report to the Violence Against Women and Girls board in April, and that is one of the asks from the sector on that one. Obviously, we're reliant on government doing something about that. All I will say is differing views exist, and frustratingly, we've gone backwards and forwards on that one. You will recall that we went through a series of prime ministers over quite a short period of time. Theresa May was quite keen, actually, on misogyny being included. Her replacement wasn't. And my understanding is that the current administration is supportive of that, but we're yet to see anything actually happen in practice. So watch this space. But at our level, it's a balancing act between what police colleagues can do, etc., and what the official data can record, and what we can do on a more practical level. I don't know, Lorna, whether you want to come in with any.
Thank you. Yeah, like Jeff's already just said, we go by the national guidance. However, we have got our own policies in place. And misogyny obviously links in really heavily with our Vogue strategy, so that's national and local priority. But we have, for the past 18 months, I believe, when 101 calls have come in, we have been asking in terms of gender if they believe that a certain crime is because of their gender. That only happens on the 101 calls, not the 999 calls, but it's just starting to give us a bit of an idea, because at the moment, in terms of hate crime, that can be perceived by a victim, the police, or a third party. But with this type of recording, because it's not in the national guidelines, we just have a victim perception of it. But that is an area that we are working on.
Thank you. Councillor Haigh.
it's just a quick bit of context, really, that within Safer Leeds, but also within Leeds City Council, we are doing things in around this that's quite bespoke in terms of the sort of jog on campaign that's being led around making sure that people feel safe whenever they're running in public spaces and things like that. So it is an evolving picture. Appreciating what Jeff's saying about the national context and this being an ever moving feast, but part of the role of us as a team is to lobby back into national government, whatever hue that might be, to sort of say, just make sure that you're taking account of what we're seeing on the ground and what people want to see. So do appreciate that question.
Thank you. I did say I had 2 parts. The other part is improving reporting, and we want to see improving in reporting, and definitely. But how do you stop the perception of when you get increased reporting, it's because you're doing worse and then tackling that? How do you stop that perception?
So that is a very good question, and one that we get asked a lot. And we've looked at and had conversations with partners and nationally. I mentioned we want to do some work with the universities here in Leeds to look at the local picture. There's usually 2 trains of thought on that. And I suppose it depends if you want to be glass half full or glass half empty. So if hate crime goes down, does that mean that we've done a better job at preventing hate crime? Some people might say it's because actually there's been so much hate crime targeted at certain communities, they get exhausted by reporting. And likewise, if hate crime goes up, sometimes the argument is put forward that that is because we've done a better job at encouraging communities to report. And sometimes it can be because there's more hate crime. And it's not easy to do to come up with an answer on that, certainly not at a national level, not even at a local level. You have to have a very nuanced approach to it. So we know at the moment there has been a rise in hate crime. There's enough anecdotal evidence out there that tells us that people's views have changed. Yeah. And that unfortunately over the last 10 years, it's plateaued recently, but plateaued at a much higher level than it was 10 years ago. Where we go forward, we've seen a drop recently. It's not huge statistically. It's, it's not into double figures really percentage wise, but it has plateaued. It is slightly coming down. The question I've been asked frequently is that because, we've done so much work recently, and potentially it could be with all the partners. I do think that there is an issue of reporting fatigue in our Muslim and Jewish communities, particularly on this issue, and to some extent also with trans people as well, where we've seen some big spikes. So what I would say is watch this space. We do want to do that work with the universities and go out there and look at all the data to try and get a better matrix on that. I don't think we'll ever 100% be able to come up with a formula that answers your question, but I think it will give us a better framework to assess those trends against. Hate crime strategic board have done some deep dives, and for example, they've looked at geography, so they've done the wedges and looked at the trends there. They've also looked at by protected characteristic, so we've done quite a lot of work to give us the background of that, and it does differ, but depending on geography and on also on the protected characteristics, but yeah, we're working on it.
Thank you. I'll bring Paul in, but just remind members that we have 4 more members wishing to ask questions still. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Golden. I'll be really quick. That is such a fundamental question for us. It's not something we just see actually in terms, that dynamic around, we want to see a reduction in hate crime because it creates so much damage in communities. But yet we also know there is a massive underreporting issue. And we see this in other areas of our works, for instance, domestic violence and abuse. We see it in terms of antisocial behaviour. Some of the most extreme forms of antisocial behaviour, should I bother reporting it or not? If I do, who do I report it to? Our strategic response to it is as outlined in the 5 priorities in the strategy, and that's why we've configured those priorities in the way that we have. Jeff went through them in the opening that Jeff gave, so I won't reiterate them, but the strategy is aimed in a way so that we strike the right balance from building our understanding of what's going on to supporting victims and everything in between. And actually, I'm more worried about underreporting than I am about seeing an increase in certain crime types, because where we don't get it reported, we aren't responding to it because we don't know about it. Really, really important point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Haigh.
Yeah, I'll try and keep it brief. This is such an important piece of work, and we know that it's not necessarily just rooted in communities and where people live, but can be across the city, across the country, across the internet. So obviously that's very challenging when you're looking at it from a local perspective. But also, I think, although this is around hate crime, but the challenging the issue of hate building up in communities. The previous paper we had about localities working, how do we integrate this work with that work in developing our communities and investing in our localities?
Yeah, another good point, Councillor Haigh. I was minded to mention this, but I wasn't sure whether we'd have time. There's a reference in the report to a thriving board. And I just wanted to share with the that would be new governance arrangements, and it's partly being thought about, Councillor Haigh, as a consequence of exactly what you're talking about here, the interdependencies that we see with our work on cohesion, our work on hate crime, our work on extremism. There's a range of activities that are going on that we are strategically responding to. And what we think we can do is we think we can, at least strategically in terms of our governance and our accountability, look at focusing on the causes of some of these issues in a better way by bringing some of these themes more closely together. And that's not at the risk of diluting our efforts on any of these agendas. It's about being able to respond more effectively for the benefit of our communities. So one of the things we would be envisaging talking to you about in the future with regards to Forward Work Programme and our community safety annual update, our work on cohesion and our work on hate crime, is exactly how that thriving board is coming together to ensure that we're responding in a way that it picks up those overlaps, because they are significant in terms of what we're dealing with.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. I'm really encouraged to see the work that's going on. Particularly welcome the jog on work as part of the wider picture. And we're keen to look at how we can work that across, certainly in outer areas, how that can cross boundaries, sort of Leeds, Bradford, where you've got the canal and other shared spaces. A couple of patterns we've observed locally is a rise in the complexity of neighbour disputes and how hate crime interplays with that, and where you've got multiple protected characteristics at play, people living very complicated lives, bringing lots of baggage with them, and how they then interact with each other. And then also the real challenge around young people, certainly as a parent of two teenage girls, their observations of boys' behaviour, the casual anti-Semitic tropes thrown around in school, which my daughter had the confidence to report because she knew what they were saying that others might not have noticed. But also the targeting of women of colour by young white boys, especially in areas where perhaps they're less diverse, but people are reporting feeling unsafe in a way that they haven't done before. Now, how we build that work in as part of the wider work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that feedback. It's clearly a complicated picture that we're sort of still constantly working through, and this is part of the strategy's aims and objectives to make sure that we understand the complexity of the hate crime picture, which is absolutely vital that we get that feedback. I mean, in terms of the neighbour disputes, I'm not probably best placed to answer that question, but I don't know if police colleagues had a view on how that might be playing out locally in terms of the picture.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't have that information either. In terms of, I mean, MPT areas across the city, there's certainly a couple of areas that have seen an increase in hate crime. Whether they are neighbourhood disputes or not, I couldn't tell you. Certainly in terms of crime, the increases we've seen have been violent injuries. Those where the significant increases have been sort of year to year. There's been a 12% increase from 2024 to this past 12 months. But I couldn't tell you if it's neighbourhoods.
Jeff?
Yeah, I've been working with antisocial behaviour colleagues actually very recently. There's a new platform, reporting platform coming in later this year. I think it's 6 months ish time, and there's going to be there's going to be specifically questions asked there relating to if you feel any of the behaviour that is taking place against you is related to the protected characteristics, and that will include all the protected characteristics, not just the ones within hate crime. So there is a recognition. I know it happens because stuff comes across my desk, and there are some live cases at the moment, which obviously I won't go into, where the issue of protected characteristics and hate is related to some of the behaviours that is allegedly taking place. So yeah.
Paul?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Galton. It's just to say that we recognise and are tracking what you are talking about, Councillor Thompson. I don't know whether there's any evidential basis to this, but we seem to have seen a greater intolerance playing out in our communities post-COVID generally. We've seen that, and we are responding to it in the best way we can. It's fantastic to hear about how your daughter responded to it, and I say that genuinely. That kind of response is exactly what we would love to see more of. And we've already talked about our restorative practice and our approach, I think, working with children in their formative years and educational settings. What I can say is that insofar as I know, we have got, as joined up, a operational footprint of council officers, ASB officers, police officers working in as tight a way as we think we can to respond to and support communities who are seeing that increase playing out. And if, you know, certainly in terms of anything that you as a member of this board or in your capacities as local ward members can see as opportunities for us to go into spaces and places to engage and support the development of responses like you've talked about, Councillor Thompson, we'd be only too happy to do that.
Toby.
Thank you. And it's building on what Paul said, and I think you've covered most of it, and also addressing a question that you'd mentioned before around the locality model and the beauty of integrating all of these services, whether it's ASB officers, police officers, council officers and ward members, means that we can respond locally to what we're seeing. And you've mentioned 3 different descriptions there in different areas. We'd be able to respond to those appropriately as well. So that hopefully addresses that integration of locality work as well.
Thank you. Councillor Rowntree.
Thank you, Chair. Quickly, I hope. Thanks for all your work on this, everyone. Paul, you mentioned rapid response on social media and rumour busting. So very important, obviously. As you know, spikes in hate crime are often driven by external events. It's highly likely that Islamophobic incidents are going to have risen because of the eruption of war in the Middle East recently. When something like that happens, do we trigger some kind of rapid response plan to enable us to get in early? Is this something that we're geared up to do?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And yes, we do. The geopolitical events now have such an immediate, significant impact on our communities, perhaps in a way that certainly my however many years of working in a community safety space, it is so dynamic. I had a wry smile when you said, "Is there a rapid response?" Because it's usually me ringing Andy up when I see from the US, as I was last week, the issues that are playing out currently in Iran. But we do have contingency response plans. Perhaps best that I don't go through all the circumstances of where those plans sit. But but for all the kind of foreseeable geographic areas and also inter-community areas, if they're not geographic, we do have what we euphemistically refer to as a plan on a page. So we do have fast time responses. It usually does start with me calling Andy, if I'm honest, but we are trying to respond as dynamically as we can, and we've got those plans documented. Cohesion sits as a corporate risk in the organisation, so the work that we're doing broadly around cohesion, which captures this, as we've talked about already, is significantly overseen now at a corporate level in terms of that risk register, and our contingency planning is all sort of built into how we need to respond. I think the challenge for us will always remain, how fast can we do that? We're doing it as quickly as we can, and we're looking to improve that response all the time.
Andy.
Yeah, it was just a clarifying comment. I mean, Paul's covered most of it, but 6 weeks in post, those contingency plans are there, but ultimately it comes down to relationships and networks, which members are absolutely key to. And even in my very short period in post, we've had to stand those up very quickly, and it's effective. But obviously, members are key to some of those communication, well, all of those communications, and making that dialogue with communities when things happen. So we do appreciate your support and help with all this, because I don't think things are going to improve necessarily or change anytime soon. So we always want to work in cooperation and collaboration with you guys. Thanks.
Thanks. Councillor Hannan.
Thank you very much, Chair. And having looked at this priority list, I think there's one thing key that's missing out of this is, especially the hate crime that's targeted our Muslim and Jewish friends, is how are you going to tackle the hate crime on social media? I think that's where the biggest problem is. I know this is targeting at a local level, which we can, fingers crossed, we can contain. But I think social media is the biggest problem out there. And within the last few weeks, I've been looking at some of the stuff that's been churned out, and social media companies are not doing anything about it. And the comments that are coming backwards and going forwards, you know, it's just out of control. I think that's something that needs to be looked into in terms of the bigger picture is social media, which is playing a big part in hate crime. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I totally agree with that, and the significance of it is the volume. The volume is almost overwhelming. I'd say a couple of things, if I may, and I don't know whether Lorna might want to come in, but I know for a fact that our police colleagues have invested significantly in terms of their forensic IT examination function. Again, some of this is fairly sensitive, but there is much more in place now in terms of an investigation support arrangement around this type of thing than ever I remember back in the day, if I dare call it that. So there is a significant investment there in terms of investigative footprint, and I am aware that there are conversations going on nationally with some of the major service providers. And it's obviously a difficult area in terms of freedom of speech and all of that. But I do think there are opportunities that we need to exploit nationally and locally in terms of addressing some of the behaviours online. And I don't think we can do it without the support of the organisations that are putting these platforms up. I think there is work ongoing at a national level. I'm in some conversations with Home Office colleagues, for instance, but I think the more voices that we can present in a uniformed way about how we keep our communities safe and our children safe, as much as anything, through better regulation of those arrangements, the better things will be for us all.
Thank you. Councillor Khan, did you want to make a closing statement?
Yes, I can, Chair. And can I thank the members for your questions and comments and your suggestions? It's been really, really productive. I'm glad I brought the strategy here this morning, and we will take those comments away. Just to let you know what's happened recently, as Andy said, he's been here in post a short period. Incident took place in Manchester recently, and we got to know, and we had a fantastic relationship with our organisation with West Yorkshire Police, with Leeds City Council, we got together, the leadership managed to get the statement out as well straight away, ensuring all the faith organisation that, we will make sure we will look after you. And the statement was issued and straight away, and I can assure the residents of Leeds that we are there to work with you and make sure you feel safer as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, and thank you for all the hard work that you do in this very difficult area. As you pointed out, there are so many things you can do in responding on a local scale, but there's so much more happening above you that you don't have any control of, but you certainly need to respond to. So we appreciate the structures that you put in place to make our best efforts as a city to make it good for our citizens. Thank you very much for your attendance. The next meeting is scheduled to be on the 18th of June, so it's after the elections. However, you know what politicians are like, and they might call in something before then, and you might be called back. But in the meantime, thank you very much for your work and investment that you've all made as members of the board over this past year, and also thank you for the officers for your continued interest and feedback to us during that time. Thanks very much.